Welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host, Nathan Battishall, and I'm going to do an episode today that comes off the back of last week's episode where I talked about some ways to improve a CDC process. And one of the areas that I spoke about was the Section 138 about the driveways. And I decided I want to do an episode around driveway approval, crossover approvals for CDC developments, because I've seen over the last few years, 4 or 5 years, that it's very, very key and it's very, very vital when you're looking at a site to really get a strong understanding of the importance of driveways. It's something that's often overlooked, and it's often something that I find a lot of people aren't aware of and they haven't really thought about it. I'm even amazed at the fact that a lot of planners and designers often overlook this element, or they leave this element too far down the track, only to have it rear its head up and become an issue down the track. So it's only going to be a short episode, this one, but it's short and succinct, but it's very, very critical. And it's something that I believe will save you heartache and save you headaches when it comes to doing fast-track approvals via CDC. Now, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, I encourage you to go back, have a listen to it. I brought out just 5 areas that I think will help progress a CDC approval process. But for today's episode purpose, I just want to hone in and focus on the Section 138. And some of you might be listening and you're not experienced in residential developments, investments and projects. You might be thinking, what's a Section 138? Now, essentially what it is that you are required to get council's approval in order of actually building a driveway crossover or getting approval for a crossover on council's land. So to put it in simple terms, obviously you will own your block of land, but you have no jurisdiction in terms of what's between your land and the curbing and the guttering and the road. Okay, so often you'll buy a property and in most cases it will have one driveway on the road. Okay, now you essentially never own that part of the road, although you have access and you've got the ability to be able to use that driveway and it's there for your purpose to be able to access your property. Essentially, you're getting permission from council to be able to put a crossover, to be able to put a driveway, okay, from the road to be able to get onto the curb and then to enter your property. Okay, so every council's slightly different in how they tackle this in terms of the costings in order to get this approved, but we call this a Section 138, okay? Now, it's approval to be able to get a driveway crossover onto your property. Now, every council is slightly different in what they allow, what they don't allow. Some councils allow multiple, some want one singular crossover. If it's a corner block, some councils will allow one on each corner. If it's a wider block, council will allow multiple crossovers. So when you're dealing with many different councils, you're dealing with many different people within that one council, there's a whole bunch of different constraints that you need to look at and you need to be aware of. And driveway crossovers, I always say, your driveways determine your design. Your driveways determine what you can and can't do on a site. And when it's a DA, it's a little bit easier because you're obviously in that design process with council and that development application process. Council is giving you feedback and you'll often get an RFI during the design phase of a DA in terms of if council prefer one crossover or they want 2 crossovers or whatever it may look like. But when it's a CDC, you're essentially not obviously submitting the application for that project, whether it be a duplex or whether it be some terraces. You're not submitting the approval for that development and that building to council. You're getting it done through a private certifier. But the one thing the private certifier cannot approve, and again, a lot of people are green in this area, but the one thing the private certifier has no jurisdiction or no authority over is the approval of a Section 138. You can't get a Section 138 approved through a private certifier. You're required to go through that particular local government, that particular council, for that driveway crossover, you're required to lodge and submit what's called a Section 138 application. Now, under that Section 138, every council's slightly different. Some require more documentation than others. Some require a whole range of different things. The cost can vary. Some councils are as cheap as $300 or $400. Some councils are $2.5 to $3,000. So again, it varies. The costs vary, and every council's slightly different. You need to go through the council's controls around what they allow, what they want to see for the driveway crossovers. Some of them require traffic management plans, and there's other documentation that you're required to have. So it's very key, firstly, for when you're acquiring a property. Acquisition's super key because it can be the difference between buying a property and walking away. But not only acquisition, then design, because as I said, your driveways determine your design. Your crossovers determine your design. So if you can only get one crossover, let's just say in the middle of a duplex site, well, it makes more sense to put your garages, for example, in the middle. Whereas if someone may want garages on the outside, obviously a lot of people love the idea of two separate driveways because it means obviously once you do a Torrens title with that duplex, it's the preferred option, is that you've then got a separate driveway for each dwelling. There's a bit more separation. Often people put like a little short fence, like a 1,200 high fence, which is exempt development between the properties. There's different things people do just to create a bit more separation. But a lot of people also like the garages down the middle as well, just for a bit of noise separation. And then your habitable area is you're more. It's sort of, you only use your garage often for storage or your vehicle. So there's different thinking and ways of thinking, but by determining what you can do, it may not be possible to have two separate crossovers. Like a lot of sites typically, like your more infill areas, let's just say for a duplex, often will have a driveway crossover on the far left, for example, or the far right. So generally what people want to do is apply for a second crossover so you can have two separate driveways driving into the duplex and deal with it that way. So you're just applying for one. But then when you apply to that council, some councils won't want you to have two. They'll want you to have one. Then there's some councils that want you to prove that you can have two crossovers, but you need to be able to prove that you can fit a vehicle between those two crossovers that complies with the Australian standards, some 5.5 metres, a lot of them 6 metres. You need to show a 6 metre separation between the crossovers. So there's a lot of things at play, and that's where it's important to understand this at an acquisition stage. But also a lot of people, and I've seen this over and over and over and over again, where people have bought sites where there's only one crossover and it's off to one side. They want to do a duplex, and they've got a whole bunch of native trees on the street on council's land with no provision or no opportunity to put a second driveway. Or it could be all well and good to get a crossover there, but there's a big native tree right on the right-hand side, for example. They've got existing driveway on the left. There's a big native tree right where your driveway needs to be on the right-hand side. And so then it might mean that you've got to basically reinstate, apply to have that driveway crossover that's on the left, move to the middle so that you can, one, avoid that tree, but also be able to access both garages. So sometimes really like your constraints on the site determine what you can and can't do. So for me, if there's constraints on a site from a driveway point of view, and if it's really going to hinder or impact the development, me personally, I like to encourage people to have a couple of scenarios. So for example, if someone wants two crossovers, that's all well and good. Base it on the fact you might need just one. I'm encouraging people more and more to get and you would have heard this if you listened to last week's episode, I'm encouraging people more and more to get a Section 138 to do this application before you go too far with your design. Because as I said, your driveways determine your design. The location of your driveways determine your design. And if council push back or they knock back that option that you really want to go with, it means you have to go back to the drawing board, but it means then you've got to change your whole design. So you need that 138 at some point anyway. You can't get it. You can't get your CDC approval without it. So you might as well get it from the start, so you've got peace of mind of knowing which pathway you can go. So you can apply for your best case scenario pathway and work backwards from there. So if it doesn't work out with that scenario, then you go back to the drawing board, you get the approval that satisfies council, and then you know exactly what you need to do. But then when it comes to executing the design for the project, so if only one is allowable, it means the design could slightly change. So don't get too attached to the design too early in the piece, because the driveway determines the design. It determines which pathway you can go. And I've just seen a lot of people go the wrong way around with this. One case study example I want to share, which was really powerful, where we had a client that owned a site and we were in the process of designing a duplex for that client. Now, all of a sudden, partway through very early in the design process, the client had the neighbour. It was off market, so no real estate involved. The client got approached by the neighbour, and who just realised, okay, someone's doing a project next to me. I don't know if I want to live next to a develop. The client had a project one block in from a corner block, and the corner block realised, you know what, I'm going to be landlocked here. I'm going to have duplexes next to me, which is not a bad thing. But in their case, they lived there for a long time. They determined that, hey, maybe this is an opportunity to see if this person who's doing the development might be interested in acquiring their site. So my client, I looked at the site for my client and he said, hey, what can we do on this site if we amalgamated, or are you best just to do 2 duplexes? And so I looked at the site, nice area, not far from the beach, really nice area. I looked at the site, it was a corner block. So by amalgamating 2 blocks, I very early on looked at, okay, we could look to do terraces here, because terraces work terrific on corner blocks and the block next to it. They're brilliant if you can get the right size site. So anyway, our client was keen to look to do this. There was an opportunity, obviously, to because it was essentially off market, it gave us some time. So I said to the client, we ran some feasibility sketches to look at the possibilities. Now, the big thing on this one wasn't so much like I was confident we could get 6 terraces. By amalgamating these 2 blocks, we could do 6 terraces. 6 terraces, Torrens title subdivision. The biggest challenge I said to the client was not so much that we can get 6 terraces designing on this thing, but the thing that will determine the yield on this site will be the approval of the Section 138 driveways. So I said to the client, what I recommend before you buy this site, the best thing we need to do is we need to do a Section 138. Now, if you walk away from this site, yes, you've spent some money on a Section 138, but you can have confidence, is it 6 or is it 5? So I worked out, as a worst case, we can get 5. But a best case, we could get 6. But to get 6, there were a couple of things at play. Now, terraces. So we knew this council pretty well. So we knew a lot of the things that they were looking for when it came to the Section 138. So we needed to make sure that we allowed a certain distance between the driveway crossovers, like the 6 metres, to be able to fit some on-street parking. That's one big thing a lot of councils will look at, because it's all well and good to put a whole bunch of driveways, but if you're hindering the amount of on-street parking, you can have an impact on that. So we had to look at a lot of things in play, and it was a tricky site because we obviously had to meet our minimum distances between driveway crossovers, but also there was a couple of things at play. There was a native tree we had to be careful of. We had to be away from, and there was also a power pole, which is very common on corner blocks. Power poles tend to obviously be on corner blocks because they're where the power lines are crossing the road and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things at play, and sometimes you just get obviously everything goes to plan where a lot of it worked out. So we were able to do a feasibility sketch based on what we believed needed to be the solution to be able to get 6 terraces on this site. But to get 6 terraces, we had to design one of the driveways closer to the tangent arc, okay? Now, generally a lot of councils will not want you putting a driveway crossover, although we see it everywhere. Even new subdivisions, you see a lot of driveway crossovers closer than 6 metres to a tangent arc. But see, a lot of councils will want to demonstrate 6 metre distance from a tangent arc. And again, we've had it approved in many areas where council is happy to go closer, provided you can show that how that can work. But as a rule of thumb, generally council like a 6 metre distance from the tangent arc. Now, the tangent arc is where the curve, when you've got a corner block, it's where the curve finishes at the actual curb and gutter. Okay, that's the tangent arc. So generally they want to see a 6 metre distance from where that curve stops to where the curb and gutter straight begins to straighten. So they want to see a distance of 6 metres from that point. Now, in order to get 6 terraces to work CDC on this site, we had to go a little bit within, I think it was about maybe a metre and a half within that tangent arc. So my client, I made him aware of the fact that, hey, if we can't do this, you're going to need to base your number on 5. So we sort of did a feasibility on 5, feasibility on 6, a sketch on both. Obviously, there was advantages of each. 5 meant you could do slightly bigger terraces, but in terms of the numbers, it really worked. It stacked up well for 6. So 6 was the number. So I said to the client, look, well, if 6 is the number, this is the best way to tackle it and to do it, because it's pointless designing 6 to get a design to work and to be amazing, the numbers to be amazing. But if you can't get the 138, you can't get a driveway to the 6th dwelling. So you've got a dwelling that can't be done, and it can't be accessed, and therefore it won't be given an occupation certificate from the certifier. So, long story short, we submitted an application. We're able to show and demonstrate to council there was a whole bunch in the area, also in new subdivisions, and demonstrate that it has been done in a lot of areas, and we got a great outcome. No pushback, no issue. Council was on board with it. Happy days. Now, what that meant for our client then, though, it meant that they had the full confidence of knowing now our biggest constraint on that site was the Section 138, was the driveway. Now, that box was now ticked. So it means then we could fully go into that project, those 6 terraces. Well, first and foremost, it meant that their numbers stacked up and meant that they could make the acquisition on that corner block and on that site for that project, because they were able to get the 138 before they even bought the property. So they obviously agreed to terms based on it was just a subject to. Now, sometimes they're harder to get on market. Obviously, a lot of agents can kill those deals because they obviously want an hour sale and they don't want that subject to. You know, it's a swear word to a lot of agents. But in this case, it was off market. Everything was, set up really well for that regard. And then it meant they could make the acquisition with confidence, knowing it worked for 6. And they had a little bit of wiggling room if they needed to from a negotiation point of view. They had a little bit more uplift. So if they had to, they could go a little bit higher on the acquisition rather than if you didn't do the Section 138, you're probably then basing your numbers on 5 and you might actually lose the site then because there's a lot less, little bit of risk. Whereas when you know that you can get 6, it's CDC. So everything else is, you've just got to design it to be compliant and happy days. You're good to go. But long story short, they then acquired that site. Then the beauty of it then, as I always say, the driveways determine the design. So literally then, those driveways then determine where the garages go. And so your garages become your first port of call. And anyone who understands the development design will understand one of the first things you look to design is your driveways, especially on steep sites, because the levels of your driveway determine the levels of everything else, because you've got to make your crossovers work. You've got to make your driveway grades work. You've got to make all of that work. So in this case, that Section 138 determined that project. And that's been a process I've religiously followed for especially any terrace development. I encourage all people I work with, and even my own terrace development that I recently did, we got that 138 before we did anything, because really, like for my personal terrace development I did 3. I wanted to have 3 separate driveways, and there was no guarantee we were going to get it. There was a concern that maybe council might make us have a combined crossover with one crossover leading to 2 garages for 2 of the terraces, and then 1 terrace with its own driveway, and then obviously getting a distance between for an off-street car park. But in our case, submitted the best case scenario application, successful on it, terrific, which meant each terrace then had its own driveway, meaning you can obviously park vehicles off the street. A lot of people don't like to use their garages for cars these days. So that was another case of a great scenario, a great outcome. But again, there's other times, and we've had other terrace developments where council want to combine. They want to have a shared crossover. For example, we had one where it was 4 terraces and council only wanted to see 2 crossovers. Now, you could go all the way through to design 4 separate crossovers, and council knock it on the head, and then you've got a design you're stuck with that you've got to completely change because you didn't do your homework or you didn't go down that process of getting the 138. So in that case, we knew straight away, we tried to get the best case scenario, didn't work out, knowing that in the back of our mind, okay, we just have to have a shared crossover that splays out then to each dwelling. So you've essentially got 2 back-to-back garages, and you work from there. So there's key critical things when it comes to Section 138s. Corner blocks is another one. If you're looking to do detached dual locks, corner blocks are great because often council will let you do a crossover on each corner. But again, some people I've seen where they've gone to buy a site and they've got a driveway crossover on one corner of the block, but then they want to put a driveway crossover on the other. But it's either too close to the tangent arc, or there's a whole bunch of native trees that really can cause havoc and can cause issues with that site. Or I've seen it where there's median strips, or where there's crossings, or where there's school signs. There's a whole bunch of different things at play that can hinder it. So for me, for that acquisition price, your best, if you haven't acquired the site and there is concerns around the 138, the best thing you can do is try and get a subject to, if it's off market, execute that 138 to get that approval before you actually pull the trigger on the process. And I just think that's a key, critical little hack when it comes to doing successful CDC developments, especially terraces, but also duplexes where you need a second crossover to get that right, because I've seen it over and over again where people have gone all the way down the path of a full package of approval documentation only to get knocked over at the final hurdle with that Section 138. So at some stage you're going to need that 138. So it's best to get it early in the piece. It determines your design. It determines which direction you go with the execution of that project, and then alleviates heartache at the end of the project because you've already got that approval in place. You've got the confidence of knowing that it works. And at the end of the day, the certifier needs it to be able to give that approval. So look, if you're looking to do a project, or you're looking to do terraces under CDC, or detached dual locks on corner blocks, or just duplexes in general, it's a little hack I think that'll set you up in good stead. So whether it be yourself or the planners and design teams you're working with, like, it's a great little hack just to do things the right way, to take the time, take the care, take the diligence to ensure that you're doing things the appropriate way. So look, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. If you know anyone doing these type of projects, feel free to share the episode with them. I hope they get a lot of value out of it. And don't forget just to jump on, if you're enjoying these episodes, jump on once again and give us a 5-star rating on whether it be on Apple or on Spotify. It helps us to continue to grow and continue to get the good news out there around doing small residential investment-based projects. So I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you again next week on the podcast. Thank you.